really think the Persian Empire is gone? Because what I'm about to show you will completely change how you see history. That empire didn't disappear. It evolved into something the modern world still fears today. Close your eyes for a moment and let your mind drift back through time, far beyond the present, into the golden haze of the ancient world. When you hear the word Persia, what appears in your imagination? Do you see magnificent palaces shimmering with jewels under the desert sun? Do you picture the legendary immortals, elite warriors in crimson robes, marching endlessly across the horizon like a sea of fire? Or perhaps you hear the whispers of mystical desert nights, echoing with stories from 1001 Nights, filled with magic, romance, and wonder. Persia feels like a dream, a civilization so radiant, so poetic, so impossibly grand, that it almost seems detached from reality, like a myth preserved in memory rather than a world that once truly existed. But now, open your eyes. Return to the present. Look at the name Iran as it appears today, on breaking news headlines, in geopolitical debates, across global media channels. What do you see? Sanctions tightening like iron chains around an entire nation. Shadowy underground nuclear facilities. A country framed by tension, isolation, and suspicion. A name that evokes caution, sometimes even fear. The contrast is sharp, brutal, even. And it forces the human mind to construct a narrative that the glorious Persian Empire has long since been crushed into dust by the weight of history. And that modern Iran is something entirely different, an unrelated fragment, born from the ruins of a lost world. But that belief is one of the greatest illusions ever created, because the truth is far more unsettling and far more powerful. The Persian Empire never truly died. It was never erased. It did not disappear. Instead, it endured. What we are witnessing is not destruction, but transformation. Not extinction, but adaptation. Not an ending, but a continuous evolution hidden behind shifting names and changing perceptions. Humanity, for centuries, has been trapped inside a linguistic illusion, a misunderstanding so deeply embedded in language that it has reshaped how we see an entire civilization. The entity we once called Persia is still here. It never left. It simply shed its outer skin and continued to exist under a name the world failed to recognize. To truly understand this enduring identity, we must travel back, far beyond modern borders, beyond political narratives, beyond the distortion of historical storytelling. We must go back thousands of years to a harsh and unforgiving world. Imagine standing on the vast Eurasian steppe, a land of relentless winds, freezing winters, and endless horizons, a place where survival is not guaranteed, but earned. From this brutal environment, waves of ancient tribes began to migrate, spreading across continents in search of land, resources, and destiny. Among them were the Indo-Iranian peoples. They were not the largest pie, not the most technologically advanced, but they possessed something far more powerful: resilience, determination, an unbreakable will to survive. These people eventually settled on a massive plateau, stretching between the Caspian Sea in the north and the Persian Gulf in the south. And there, on this land of extremes, they built something extraordinary. They called themselves Aryan, not in the distorted sense used in modern history, but in its original meaning: noble, free, honorable. Their homeland was known as Aryanim Vaija, the land of the noble ones. Over centuries, language evolved, sounds shifted, words condensed. Aryanim became Iran, and eventually it became a single enduring name: Iran. This name is not new. It is not modern. It is not a political invention. It is ancient, rooted in identity, in language, in memory, in blood. For over 3,000 years, the people of that land have known themselves by this name. In the deepest layers of their collective consciousness, they have always been Iranian. So then, a question emerges. If they have always been Iran, where did the name Persia come from? The answer is both simple and tragic. It came from outsiders. When the ancient Greeks first encountered this vast civilization, they did not see the whole. They saw only a part. Specifically, a powerful region in the southwest known as Pars, or Persis. To them, that region represented the empire. And so, from their limited perspective, they named the entire civilization after that single area, Persia. It was not entirely incorrect, but it was incomplete, simplified, distorted. And because Greek historians and later Roman writers held immense influence over the historical narratives of the Western world, this name became dominant. It spread, it solidified, it became accepted truth. And with it, a subtle but powerful illusion was born. The world called them Persia, but they called themselves Iran. This mismatch persisted for centuries, and over time, it created a deep fracture in human perception. The West began to romanticize Persia, turning it into a symbol of exotic beauty, poetry, luxury, and ancient glory. Meanwhile, the true identity, Iran, remained hidden beneath layers of misunderstanding. The result? A split reality. On one side, we have Persia, a dream, a fantasy, a beautifully crafted illusion of the past. On the other side, we have Iran, a living, breathing, complex reality, resilient, adaptable, misunderstood, but very much alive. But here's the truth. These are not two different civilizations. They are the same, seen through two different lenses. And once you understand this, everything changes. You begin to realize that history is not just a record of events. It is a story shaped by perspective, by language, by those who had the power to write it. And sometimes that story hides more than it reveals. The fall of Persia was never a true collapse. It was a transformation, disguised by words. And Iran, far from being a new or disconnected nation, is the living continuation of one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. A civilization that refused to die. A civilization that adapted, absorbed, and survived. A civilization that still exists right before our eyes. History, at its core, is a graveyard. A vast, silent graveyard filled with the ruins of once mighty empires, civilizations that believed themselves eternal, yet ultimately faded into dust. Look at ancient Egypt, a land of divine pharaohs, pyramids piercing the heavens, and a civilization that once defined the limits of human imagination. Today, its language is no longer spoken, its gods forgotten, its identity reduced to relics and museum displays. Look at Babylon, once the jewel of Mesopotamia, home to the legendary Hanging Gardens. Now it survives only as fragmented ruins buried beneath layers of sand and time. Even the mighty Roman Empire, which once ruled half the known world, fractured, collapsed, and dissolved into history. This is the natural order of civilization. Empires rise, empires fall, empires vanish. But Iran is different. Iran did not exist behind impenetrable walls. It was not protected by oceans or mountains strong enough to keep enemies away. Instead, it stood at the center of the world's most violent crossroads, a land constantly exposed, constantly invaded, constantly tested. Wave after wave of conquerors swept across the Iranian plateau like storms that should have erased everything in their path. And yet, something impossible happened. Iran did not die. The conquerors who should have ended everything in 334 BCE, Alexander the Great, launched one of the most ambitious military campaigns in human history. His army stormed into Persia, defeated the Achaemenid Empire, and set its capital, Persepolis, on fire. The flames consumed one of the greatest cities the ancient world had ever seen. To any other civilization, this would have been the end. But it wasn't. Alexander himself, the conqueror, began to change. He adopted Persian clothing. He embraced Persian customs. He married into Persian nobility. Instead of destroying Persia, he became part of it. Centuries later, a new force arrived, more brutal, more relentless. Arab armies surged across the region in the 7th century, carrying with them a new religion, Islam. They crushed the Sassanid Empire, dismantled its political structure, and replaced its systems with their own. Language, religion, governance, everything should have been overwritten. And in many ways, it was. But beneath the surface, something deeper remained untouched. The Iranian people did not resist blindly. They adapted, they absorbed, they transformed. Instead of losing themselves in the wave of Islam, they reshaped it, creating a distinct identity through Shia Islam, separating themselves from the dominant Sunni world. Once again, the conquerors believed they had taken control. But in reality, they had stepped into a system that would slowly reshape them. Then came the most terrifying force of all. The Mongols, led by Genghis Khan. Their armies did not conquer, they annihilated. Cities were erased, populations were slaughtered, entire regions were reduced to silence. Historians describe towers built from human skulls, monuments of terror meant to erase not just life, but memory itself. No civilization, no matter how powerful, should have survived this. And yet, Iran did. The invisible weapon, culture pianed. Here is where the story takes a turn that defies logic. Iran did not defeat its enemies through military strength. It defeated them through something far more subtle and far more powerful: culture. When conquerors arrived, they quickly discovered something unsettling. They could win battles, but they could not rule effectively. The Iranian civilization they had overtaken was too complex, too refined, too deeply structured. Administration, literature, art, philosophy, everything operated at a level the invaders could not replicate. And so, something extraordinary happened. The conquerors began to learn. They adopted the Persian language. They embraced Persian governance. They built architecture inspired by Persian design. They surrounded themselves with Persian scholars and administrators. Over time, they changed. The invaders were no longer shaping Iran. Iran was shaping them, the guardian of identity. In one of the darkest periods of foreign domination, when the Persian language itself was at risk of disappearing, a man emerged who would alter the course of history. His name was Ferdowsi. For over 30 years, he dedicated his life to writing a monumental epic, the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. Composed of over 50,000 verses, written entirely in Persian, it preserved the myths, heroes, kings, and identity of an entire civilization. This was not just literature. It was resistance. It was preservation. It was a weapon. At a time when foreign powers dominated politics and language, Ferdowsi ensured that the Persian identity would never disappear. Through poetry, he locked the soul of a nation into words that could survive any empire. The ultimate strategy, survival through transformation. Iran's survival was not based on resistance alone. It was based on a deeper, more sophisticated strategy. Absorb, adapt, transform. Instead of rejecting invaders outright, Iran allowed them to enter, only to gradually reshape them from within. It is like a powerful current beneath the surface of the ocean, invisible, silent, but unstoppable. Empires came believing they would rule Iran, but in time, they became part of it. the civilization that refused to die. Imagine a wounded lion, scarred from countless battles, surrounded by enemies, but still standing, still breathing, still unbroken. That is Iran. A civilization that accepted destruction, but refused extinction. A nation that lost kingdoms, but never lost identity. A people who understood something the rest of the world often forgets. Power is not always about domination. Sometimes it is about endurance. Sometimes it is about transformation. And sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating your enemies, but outlasting them. Now, place yourself in March of 1935. The world is standing on the edge of transformation. Empires are shifting. Ideologies are rising. Nations are beginning to redefine who they are and how they want to be seen. Inside embassies across Tehran, foreign diplomats sit quietly at their desks, surrounded by papers, ink, and the calm routine of international bureaucracy. Nothing feels unusual until a document arrives, a formal communication from the government of Reza Shah Pahlavi. The message is short, precise, uncompromising. From this moment forward, the world must no longer refer to this nation as Persia. The correct and official name is Iran. At first, confusion spreads, then resistance. To Western diplomats, this decision feels unnecessary, almost irrational. Why abandon a name that carries centuries of prestige? A name embedded in poetry, art, literature, and global imagination? Persia evokes beauty, romance, elegance, mystery. Iran feels unfamiliar, hard, political. Even figures like Winston Churchill openly criticized the change, considering it inconvenient and misguided. But what they failed to understand was everything. This was never about a name. This was about identity, and more importantly, power, the weight of a name. For centuries, the word Persia had not belonged to the people themselves. It was a name shaped by outsiders, defined by Greek historians, reinforced by Roman narratives, and romanticized by Western culture. It was not false, but it was incomplete. And over time, it became something far more dangerous. A label, a lens through which the world viewed an entire civilization. By the early 20th century, Persia no longer represented strength. It represented weakness, a declining state, a fragmented territory, a nation vulnerable to foreign influence. Britain and Russia had already turned it into a geopolitical chessboard. They controlled resources. They influenced politics. They shaped decisions. Persia, in the eyes of the world, was no longer an empire. It was a possession. Reza Shah's decision. Reza Shah saw this clearly. He understood that as long as the world continued to use the name Persia, it would continue to see the country through a distorted colonial lens. So he made a decision that would echo across history. He rejected the name, not because it was wrong, but because it no longer served his people. Instead, he demanded the use of a name that had always existed within the nation itself, Iran, a name derived from ancient roots, a name meaning land of the Aryans, a name tied not to external perception, but to internal identity. This was not rebranding. This was reclamation, a global shock. The reaction from the West was immediate and uncomfortable. They were being forced to let go of something familiar, something romantic, something they believed they understood. But now they were confronted with a new reality, a reality that did not fit their narrative, a nation that refused to be defined by them. The shift was more than linguistic. It was psychological. The illusion of Persia began to crack. And behind it, something far more complex emerged, a living civilization, a nation with agency, a people reclaiming their story, the era of awakening. The timing of this decision was no coincidence. The 1930s were marked by a surge of nationalism across the world. Countries were redefining themselves, breaking away from colonial influence, reclaiming identity. Iran was part of that wave. Reza Shah's vision was bold. He wanted to modernize the country rapidly and decisively. Industry, infrastructure, education, governance, everything needed to evolve. But he also understood a critical truth. Modernization without identity is fragile. So instead of abandoning the past, he anchored the future in it. The name Iran became a bridge, a connection between ancient heritage and modern ambition, breaking the illusion. For the rest of the world, this change forced a confrontation. They had to face a difficult realization. What they thought was Persia had never truly disappeared. It had simply never been understood correctly. The name Persia was an illusion, a projection shaped by external narratives. Iran was the reality, raw, complex, unfiltered, and very much alive. The beginning of conflict. But reclaiming identity is never peaceful. It disrupts power structures. It challenges perceptions. It forces the world and the nation itself to confront contradictions. And in Iran's case, that tension would soon explode. The decision made in 1935 was only the beginning. Because once a nation begins to redefine itself, it must face the consequences. And the next chapter would be one of the most explosive transformations in modern history. After the renaming of Iran in 1935, the nation stood at a fragile crossroads, caught between the weight of its ancient past and the pressure of a rapidly changing future. But the struggle for identity was far from over. In fact, it was about to enter its most dangerous phase. When Mohammad Reza Pahlavi rose to power, he carried with him a vision that was nothing short of audacious: to transform Iran into a modern, Western-style superpower in the heart of the Middle East. He didn't just want progress. He wanted dominance. He wanted recognition. He wanted to resurrect greatness. Under his rule, Iran underwent a dramatic transformation. Industries expanded, infrastructure grew, education systems modernized. The nation opened itself to global influence, especially from the West, particularly the United States. From the outside, Iran looked like a rising star, a nation awakening, a civilization reclaiming its place on the global stage. But beneath the surface, a storm was forming, the return of an illusion. To legitimize his authority and strengthen national pride, the Shah turned to history, the same history that had once been misunderstood by the world. In 1971, he orchestrated one of the most extravagant celebrations ever witnessed in the modern era. The occasion? The 2500th anniversary of the Persian Empire. The location? The ruins of Persepolis, the ancient capital of a civilization that had once ruled the world. Under dazzling lights, surrounded by global elites, the Shah stood before the legacy of Cyrus the Great and declared, "Rest in peace, Cyrus, for we are awake." For a moment, it felt as though time had reversed. The illusion of Persia, the grandeur, the glory, the mythology had returned. Champagne flowed through the desert. Luxury filled the air. World leaders gathered in awe. To the global audience, Iran appeared powerful, elegant, victorious. But this was only one side of reality. The hidden crisis beyond the golden lights of Persepolis, a very different Iran existed. One that the cameras did not show. Millions of ordinary citizens were struggling to survive. Inflation was rising. Economic inequality was widening. Rural communities lacked basic infrastructure, while the elite celebrated in unimaginable luxury. The majority of the population lived in silence, watching, waiting, and growing restless. But the true fracture was not just economic. It was cultural. A nation divided. The Shah's aggressive push toward westernization came with consequences. Traditional values were disrupted, religious institutions were weakened, cultural identity began to feel threatened, and perhaps most dangerously, foreign influence became impossible to ignore. To many Iranians, especially those rooted in religious and traditional life, this was not modernization. It was submission. It was a betrayal of identity, a betrayal of history, a betrayal of the very essence that had allowed Iran to survive for thousands of years. A deep divide began to form. On one side, urban elites, educated, modern, aligned with Western ideals. On the other, religious communities, anchored in faith, tradition, and cultural authenticity. This was not just a political disagreement. It was a collision of two worlds, two identities, two visions of what Iran should be. And in the space between them, tension began to rise. The explosion of 1979. By 1979, that tension had reached its breaking point. What followed was not a protest, it was a revolution. Millions of people poured into the streets, not to celebrate power, but to overthrow it. They were not chanting the names of kings. They were not calling for empire. They were following a new voice, a voice that had been suppressed but never silenced. Ayatollah Khomeini, a religious leader, a symbol of resistance, a figure who embodied everything the Shah had tried to erase. The revolution moved with unstoppable force. The monarchy collapsed, the Shah fled the country, and the system that had ruled for centuries was gone, almost overnight. In its place emerged something entirely new, the Islamic Republic of Iran. The collapse of a vision. This was not just a change in government. It was a complete transformation of identity. The dream of a westernized Iran, modern, secular, globally integrated, was replaced by a nation rooted in religion, independence, and resistance. To the West, it was a shock. A trusted ally had become an adversary. A symbol of progress had become a symbol of defiance. But for Iran, it was something deeper. It was a return, not to Persia, but to a version of itself that refused to be shaped by external forces, a version that chose identity over acceptance, sovereignty over comfort, resistance over submission. The end of the dream. The events of 1979 shattered the final illusion, the illusion of effortless modernization, the illusion that identity could be reshaped without consequence. The illusion that history could be selectively revived without awakening deeper forces. Everything collapsed. And what remained was real, raw, complicated, uncomfortable, but undeniably authentic. A nation reborn through conflict. Iran did not become weaker after 1979. It became something else, something more difficult to define, more difficult to control, more difficult to understand. A nation shaped not just by history, but by struggle. A civilization that once again proved its greatest strength. Not dominance, not wealth, not illusion, but the ability to transform, even in the face of internal collapse. Iran today, the lion that stands alone. Step into the 21st century. The name Iran no longer belongs only to history. It lives in headlines, debates, and global tension. It is often described through a narrow lens: sanctions, nuclear negotiations, regional conflict. To much of the world, Iran appears as a fortress, isolated, defiant, and surrounded by pressure. But this surface view hides something far deeper. To understand Iran today, you must look beyond politics, beyond media narratives, beyond the noise. You must look into the foundation beneath it all, a cultural and historical core that has survived everything. Because what you are seeing today is not just a country. It is the continuation of a civilization that has refused to disappear. A nation under pressure. For decades, Iran has lived under one of the most intense systems of economic and political pressure in modern history. Sanctions limit trade. Global systems restrict access. Political tension never fully fades. From the outside, it appears as though Iran is constantly being pushed, contained, isolated, tested. And yet, it does not collapse. It adapts. It persists. This is not luck. It is identity, a deeply rooted pattern that has defined Iran for thousands of years. Self-reliance, resilience, endurance, the culture beneath the surface. While global narratives focus on power and politics, daily life inside Iran tells a different story. In cities like Tehran, Shiraz, and Isfahan, life is not frozen under pressure. It flows, it evolves, it remembers. Families gather every year to celebrate Nowruz, the Persian New Year, a tradition that has continued for over 3,000 years. Poetry is not a relic of the past. It is part of everyday life. The words of ancient poets are still spoken, still felt, still lived. Hospitality remains sacred. Art continues to flourish. Architecture still reflects identity. These are not symbols preserved for tourists. They are lived realities, even in the face of pressure. The true weapon, cultural continuity. Iran's greatest strength has never been military power. It has never been economic dominance. It has always been something far more powerful, culture. Throughout history, Iran has mastered a unique ability to absorb influence without losing identity, to adapt without breaking, to evolve without disappearing. That same pattern continues today. Modern life exists alongside ancient tradition. Technology grows without erasing cultural memory. Global awareness expands without dissolving identity. Iran is not stuck in the past. It is moving forward, but on its own terms. Perception versus reality. To the outside world, Iran is often reduced to a single narrative, a political problem, a strategic threat, a complicated region. But this perspective repeats an ancient mistake, judging a civilization only by what is visible. The reality is layered. Iran is not just a state, it is a civilization that has carried its identity across thousands of years, and unless that depth is understood, nothing else will make sense. The lion that endures. Imagine a lion, not young, not untouched, but old, marked by battles, shaped by survival, scarred, yet standing, watching, waiting, unbroken. That is Iran. A nation that has faced invasion, pressure, transformation, and conflict, and yet has never lost itself. The truth revealed. At this point, the illusion is gone. Persia was never lost. It was transformed. Iran is not something new. It is the continuation, a raw, complex, living continuation. What exists today is not the end of a civilization. It is its current form, the deeper lesson. The story of Iran is not just about one nation. It is a universal lesson. Survival is not about avoiding destruction. It is about enduring through it, adapting, transforming, holding on to identity, even when everything else changes. Empires fall, systems collapse, names evolve, but identity, true identity, endures. The final question. So the real question is not what happened to Persia, because Persia never truly disappeared. The real question is, what allows something to survive everything and still remain itself? And perhaps that is the question every civilization and every human being must eventually answer. Conclusion. The truth that remains. Across thousands of years of war, conquest, destruction, and rebirth, one truth has remained unshaken. Iran was never destroyed. It was never erased. It was never replaced. It endured. What the world once called Persia did not disappear into history. It evolved, it transformed, it adapted again and again through fire, through collapse, through unimaginable pressure. Empires burned it, invaders ruled it, revolutions reshaped it, and yet it remained. Not because it was stronger in battle, not because it was richer in resources, but because it held on to something far more powerful, its identity, its culture, its memory. The deeper truth, history often teaches us about power, about armies, about victories, but Iran teaches us something different. It teaches us that true power is not in domination. It is in endurance. It is in the ability to bend without breaking, to change without losing yourself, to survive without surrendering your core. Because in the end, the civilizations that last are not the ones that conquer the most. They are the ones that remain themselves, no matter what changes around them. Life lesson. Apply this to your own life. Now pause for a moment and look at your own life. How often do we try to become something we are not, just to fit into the world around us? How often do we wear masks, build illusions, chase versions of success that don't truly belong to us? In a world driven by social media, expectations, and constant comparison, it is easy to lose yourself, to become a version that looks good but feels empty. And that is where the lesson of Iran becomes powerful. The lesson: you don't survive by pretending to be something else. You survive by knowing exactly who you are and refusing to lose it. Apply it. Stop chasing the perfect image others expect. Stop building a life based on external validation. Stop wearing your own version of Persia just to impress the world. Instead, embrace your truth, build depth, not appearance, strengthen your inner identity. Because when life becomes difficult, and it will, it is not your image that will save you. It is your core. Final message. Iran survived not because it avoided destruction, but because it transformed without losing itself. And you can do the same. If this story changed the way you see history, then it's time to go deeper. Because this is not just about Iran. This is about how civilizations survive, how identity shapes destiny, and how truth often hides behind the stories we think we already understand. Subscribe to Grace and Light and join us as we uncover the hidden truths behind history, faith, and human identity. Because what you discover next might change the way you see the world forever.